This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 105 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to the Practice of Therapy, I'm glad you're here. Glad you found us. Glad you've tuned in. And if you're coming back for more, glad you're back. And I hope you've taken time to subscribe to the podcast. Well, folks, I have to apologize first off because I didn't have an episode last week. And as life has it, that takes its twists and turns, which is going to be kind of the theme of this podcast episode. I wasn't able to get a podcast out. Partially just because a big reason is that about the time I was going to record everything, I didn't have a voice. As you can probably tell, I'm a little bit stuffy today and still getting over a cold, but woke up that morning that I was going to do things, and it was just really getting late in the week, and I couldn't even talk. So anyway, that was part of it. And then the other part of it is that I had my wife, I've shared with some of you before on the podcast, my wife has had some pretty significant health issues, and she's disabled. And anyway, she had another fall, and needless to say, we had put everything on hold that week. She's going to be okay, but she fell and got a compression fracture in her back, and needless to say, she's in a lot of pain, but she was in the hospital for a few days, and now she's in a rehab facility going through PT, which really she thinks stands for physical torture rather than physical therapy. But anyway, she's on the mend, and I appreciate all the nice thoughts and vibes and karma and prayers that have been coming through for her. But I think she's gonna be okay and pull through this. But anyway, when those things happen, yeah, it just kind of throws you for a loop, and you have to regroup and do things in a different way. And so one of the things is that the podcast just kind of fell down the priority list last week. So anyway, I'm back, and so we're getting back on track and getting into a new routine with my wife in the rehab facility. And but I'll talk some more about that, just about being able to be flexible in your practice. But despite all of that, there's lots of exciting things that happened over the past week in terms of the practice of therapy. First off, I want to mention that, for those of you that have subscribed to my email list and receive emails from me, you got from me last week the new private practice startup guide. It is something that has needed to be updated and added to, and so I've got that out there, and that's a free guide for anyone that signs up with me through the practice of therapy. And so if you'd like to get a copy, if you don't have a copy of that already, it's if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com, and you'll see links right there on the first page, and you might even get a pop-up that will invite you to sign up and get the private practice startup guide. And it's actually it's really a book in a way. It's about 28 pages of just some of the things you need to think about when you're starting a private practice. And I think even for people that have been in practice for a while, I think it can be helpful to you as well, as maybe get hit on some things that maybe you haven't thought about before. But anyway, that's out there. Got that done. Got that checked off. I was when I was waiting around in the hospital for them to do tests and all the stuff they were doing for my wife, I was able to get that done. And so fortunately I had my computer with me and did all that. But, the other thing that I wanted to let you know about is I've got another webinar coming up with, again, I'm partnering with Julie Harris from Green Oak Accounting, who's one of the sponsors for the podcast. We're going to be doing a webinar on getting ready for tax season, and that's going to be on December the 11th. And if you'll go to practiceoftherapy.com tax webinar, you can sign up for that. And again, it's a free webinar, and we're just going to be talking about taxes and what you need to know in order to prepare for tax season. For some folks I know that listen, this might be your one of your first years of being ready for all the tax stuff, or maybe you've been doing it a while and need some clarification. So anyway, glad that Julie is teaming up with me on that, and she's going to really lend a lot of her expertise to that. One other thing I wanted to mention before we jump into today's topic is if you will go over to one of the podcasts I listen to quite a bit is Ask Pat, and it's a podcast that's done by the one and only Pat Flynn, who is best known for his website and podcast called Smart Passive Income. But he's really quite a leader and guru out there in the online business space. And anyway, I got the privilege of being on his podcast, the Ask Pat podcast, and that is episode number 1094 of the Ask Pat podcast. And I'll have links in the show notes here to that particular podcast. But anyway, Pat coached me through being able to do a better job at doing what we refer to as a pitch for my Money Matters course, and just talking me through that so I could learn how to better communicate what that course is about and have people interested in it. So I want to invite you to listen to me on the Ask Pat podcast. I was so thrilled to be able to be on that podcast, and big thanks to Pat Flynn and his team for letting me have that privilege. So anyway, be sure to go check that out. Again, it's I think if you go to askpat.com, and then it'll bring you up on the right page, and you can just go to episode 1094 of the Ask Pat podcast. So anyway, I was just excited about that, and that was a fun thing. So without further ado, we're going to jump into talking about those times when things don't go as planned, or as I like to put it, things start to go awry, and how you stay prepared for that and how you regroup. I think it's an important topic. So let's jump into this, and hopefully this will be some helpful information for you. If you love dreaming about growing your practice, but feel a disconnect between where you are now and where you want to be, I've got a friend who can help you. Julie Harris and her team at Green Oak Accounting can translate your action plan into your profit and loss statement. If you're behind on your books or need someone on your financial team who really understands private practice, schedule a free consultation by going to www.greenoakaccounting.com. That's www.greenoakaccounting.com. You know, this past week when I had my mastermind group, one of the topics that came up for us was just this whole concept of change, and really having to, as I like to say, switch horses in the middle of the stream. We were talking about, one of the practitioners in my group was talking about the fact that they had hired someone as a contractor or an employee, and all of a sudden they up and quit. And one of the things that they did was that they kind of took their clients with them. And it just really was obviously very distressing for the owner of the practice, and just talking about how do you prepare for things like that, because it really just caught them off guard and just kind of blindsided them. The other thing too that comes up when we think about things changing unexpectedly is, as I shared earlier in this episode, just with life changes that happen, with my wife falling and just really having to regroup. I had to cancel all of my appointments for the week. And not only the hardship it placed on us, but also just on my clients, because they changed had to change their schedules and had to reschedule with me and all of that. And so those kinds of things, those life events and those things that happen can just be really frustrating. And one of the things that I'm reminded of is that I think the other, and this just learning this from work with my clients, is that when changes like that happen, when unexpected things happen, it just brings up a lot of anxiety for us. And it's just really the not knowing and not being prepared is always hard, I think, for most anyone. But a few things I've learned about this just along the way is just the importance of having some preparation for things like this ahead of time. I had no way of predicting, my wife's fall. But one of the things that helped me get through that is that I did have a network of friends in town here that could help out. And so with just a few text messages, I had one of our good friends to go over to be with her at the hospital while I was getting back into town. Had another friend that was able to go over just because I knew that my wife would be scared and it would just be a scary time for her. But those are the kinds of things that I think are just so important to remember when we think about change and being prepared for the unexpected. The other thing too is just making sure you've got the right systems in place. All I had to do was send a text to our intake coordinator. I said, this is what's happened. This is what I need to have happen during for this next week. I just need to cancel all of my appointments. I don't really have a choice because I can't be there. And so the good news for me in that situation was just a tough situation is that I had the systems and people in place to be able to be prepared for that. The other thing that I'm reminded of when thinking about expecting if you're faced with change and that sort of thing is the importance of having just some good time management skills. In the last podcast episode with Brent Schweitzer, we talked about getting things done, the getting things done, GTD, I always say it backwards, GTD system. And one of the big take homes with that whole system that I learned from David Allen, the guy that wrote the book, is just the importance of having a way to capture everything. Things are all of us throughout our days and weeks have a lot of stuff handed to us, either things that our clients need or things that our family needs, all of those kinds of things. And it's like a lot of information just being handed to us. And so you have to have a way to kind of capture that. And one of the things that I've learned and just gone back to is just some low-tech stuff. Certainly my phone is something I stay on my phone way too much, and my wife would tell you that. But there's, I use an iPhone, and so there's the notes in iPhone, which are really handy. But one of the things that I think works even better for me is my planner. I've shared with folks before, I've got the planner I'm using now is called the Full Focus Planner, it's produced by Michael Hyatt and his company. And one of the things about that is that I'm using it as my capture device. I keep it with me most everywhere I go. It's either in my car or in my backpack. And as things come up, I've learned to just start writing them down and just making a note of it, either on one of the open pages or on a to-do list. And so by having a way to capture those things, it really helps me kind of break things down into smaller pieces. Again, one of the things about being overwhelmed or being faced with things that cause some anxiety is to be able to break things down into smaller pieces. When my wife fell, I just had to go into a total regroup and just had to redo my schedule. And then I had people to contact, doctors to contact. I had to arrange for a rehab facility. All of those things were things that were just, needless to say, overwhelming. And when I looked at the big picture of it, it was even more overwhelming. But I think what got me through that was to be able to write things down into just individual steps, into the smaller steps we need in order to accomplish the big thing that we're faced with. And so that not only works just with, in situations when we're overwhelmed or when we're in a crisis or that sort of thing, but just in running our practice in general. I think all of us have different goals for our practices. We have this dream or an idea about how big we want our practices to be, what it looks like, what our typical day is, and all of that. And I think when you can take those things and write them down and just be able to look at them, it really makes it less overwhelming when you can look at the individual pieces. One of the things with my planner is that it has a section on it that is just talks about your daily big three, is something that Michael Hyatt and his team kind of coined. But the big three are just three things that I want to accomplish for that day, and it's intentionally left at no more than three, because when we start getting too many things on our plate, it is overwhelming. And so being able to break those things down into smaller pieces and just tackle one thing at a time. And if you think about it, that's how we get anything that we need to do done. We just break it down into the smallest possible pieces and do it one thing at a time. There's a myth that's out there about multitasking, and the truth of the matter is, and research is starting to show, is that none of us are really good multitaskers. Our brains just don't have the capacity to handle things in that way, and so we need to really just break things down into smaller pieces. And so I think when change comes, it's good to be able to have a way, as I mentioned before, to capture it all. And I think one of the things that has helped me is to really kind of write everything down. In many ways, that's what we do when we teach our clients about journaling. We're having them to write things down in a way to where we can kind of take the stuff that's on the inside and kind of put it on the outside so we can look at it. Another exercise I think that is helpful, and I'm sure most of you have probably done exercises like this, really kind of a brainstorming exercise where you take everything that comes to mind around a particular topic or a particular project or something you want to accomplish and just throw it all on a whiteboard and just put it down. Doesn't matter what order it's in or how it's organized, but to just really do kind of a brain dump. And so when I think we're faced with unexpected changes, it's always a good idea to just do a brain dump on it. And so, again, that's where like planning and journaling and all of that sort of thing comes in. I think the other thing that is an important thing to remember is to somehow or another get our mindset around being able to embrace change. One of the things that, again, it sounds kind of cliche, but life is a constant flux of change. I mean, things are always changing, always evolving. And I think the more that we can embrace that, the better it is. We just become better equipped to handle things that come up unexpectedly. It's paradoxical in a way because as I mentioned, I'm talking a lot about my planner, which didn't mean to speak that much about it. But in my planner, on each one of the daily pages, there's like a little quote at the top. And on today's page, it's I think it's just very fitting, and it's a quote from Maya Angelou, or Angelou. I can't remember how she pronounced her name, but anyway, it says, "If you don't like something, change it, and if you can't change it, change your attitude." And I just love that quote because, I think a big part of embracing change is just being able to accept things when things are changed. I'm reminded of this terrible analogy or metaphor of, for those of you that have ever experienced having a toilet to overflow. It's never a fun thing. And one of the things about that is that when a toilet overflows and you have got literally crap on the floor. Not a very pleasant thing to think about. But when that happens, really the only choice you've got is to get in there in it. And you have to go in and turn the water off and then, try to clean it up as best you can, maybe call a plumber, try to unstop it yourself, whatever you have to do. But in a crisis like that, when you're really knee deep in stuff, the thing that you have to be able to do is just embrace the fact that it's going to be messy for a while. And you get in there and you clean it up and you fix things, and then you get back to kind of on the path and on the road to life. And so I think a lot of times the other thing too, as I mentioned earlier, was just about anxiety. And as I tell my clients a lot of times, anxiety has a way of tricking us into thinking that we can't handle things sometimes. And so one of the things that I think is important to remember is that most of us are equipped to handle most of the things that are handed to us in life. It might not be easy. It might be difficult. It might be uncomfortable, but I think we can always work our way through it. And a lot of times it involves drawing on supports and drawing on help. As I've mentioned already, I think a big part of being able to handle change is in the preparation. As I've said already, change is going to happen. We're going to have the unexpected to come up. And so I think the more we can embrace that and be prepared for it, the easier it is to handle it when it comes along. One of the things that I really reiterate in the course that I put out there, Money Matters in Private Practice, was just being able to have a financial reserve in place for your practice. And the whole purpose in having that is because of change that can occur. We're all susceptible to having maybe weeks where our client volume goes down. In other words, we have a lot of people to cancel or to change appointments and that sort of thing. Sometimes that's predictable. Other times it's not. But whenever we're not seeing clients or don't have a busy week, then we kind of take a little bit of a financial hit for that. So you have to be prepared for those things. So I think the more you can think things out, and really, I don't think it's helpful to catastrophize things, but to be able to think, okay, what would be the safety nets I need to have in place for my practice? One side note here that one thing that might has been just a little bit on my radar here, was just thinking about having to drop everything to go, be with my wife and help her through what she's going through. As I've had to kind of drop the practice to some degree, I've had to let just take off. And one of the things about that is I had some things in place in order to be able to do that. But again, one of the things that I really would recommend for everybody to do, and it's something that I need to update, and that is having a professional will. So if, God forbid, something were to happen and you were to die tomorrow, what would happen to your practice and who would take over and what would happen with your clients? Again, it's not something we tend to like to think about or dwell on, and I don't think we need to dwell on it, but we do need to have some things in place. For example, most of us have just a whole series of passwords for our computers and all of the things that we have access to. What would be the plan? So if something were to happen to you, you were to come incapacitated in some way, or just worst case scenario, die, how would people have access to those things? So those are things that we need to think about when it comes to change. I will try to remember to put in the show notes maybe an example of a professional will. I know that TherapyNotes, one of the sponsors of the podcast, has some good ideas about that on their website and their blog, because that's one of the questions they ask when you go to set up TherapyNotes is what sort of professional will do you have in place, and what are the backups should something happen to you to where you couldn't access the administrative functions of that sort of thing. So, I think when change occurs, the more prepared we are for it, obviously the better we are off we are. But the other thing about it is there are going to be those times when change will occur unexpectedly, and we're not necessarily as well prepared as we would like to be. So again, that's where the mindset comes in. That's where the preparation, maybe a little bit of preparation ahead of time for those things comes in, of being able to know what to do. The other thing I'd like to say about change, and hopefully end on a little more positive note, is that change is always an opportunity. I'm reminded of a Chinese symbol. I believe it's the symbol for a crisis, and actually it's a combination of two other symbols, and it just means a dangerous opportunity is what the word in Chinese is literally translates to. And so I think anytime there is change, we also have an opportunity. Growth always occurs when we get outside our comfort zone. I'm reminded of an example that I love of, if you can remember back when you maybe first learned to ride a bicycle. In order for you to have learned how to ride a bicycle, you had to get yourself uncomfortable. If you think about it, getting on a bicycle for the first time, it's just really uncomfortable. I mean, in terms of keeping your balance, you're not sure if your bike is going to stay upright. But what you eventually figure out through trial and error is that the faster you pedal, the easier it is to navigate what the bike does, and being able to keep it upright and be able to make turns and do all the stuff on a bicycle. But in order to do that, in order to learn that, you have to get uncomfortable. You have to get outside your comfort zone in order to grow and learn. And so I think anytime we're faced with change, particularly those things that are changes that are unexpected, we always learn from it and we always grow from it. So in that sense, I think it's good to sometimes maybe be a little more willing to embrace change and be able to look at it in that way. Again, change is inevitable, and we're going to always go through a flux and change in life. And I think the thing is, again, I'm repeating myself, is to learn to embrace that and learn to accept that. And then there'll be times when there are changes and even losses through life. And I think when that happens, we grieve, and it's okay to grieve whenever we experience a loss or a change that is just rocks our world, so to speak. And so that's when we also draw on those supports and not having to go through those changes alone. And that's how we make it through it. So hopefully this will give you some food for thought just around change and some things to be thinking about in terms of being prepared for change and also being able to embrace it at the same time. Well, folks, thanks for listening to my thoughts and comments just on change today. And one of the things, again, I'll say that I'd like for you to maybe consider is that I think a lot of the time the stories we tell ourselves are that we can't handle change, but you absolutely can, and you absolutely have what it takes to embrace and handle whatever might be thrown your way. So hopefully this will be of some encouragement to you in this particular episode. Again, I thank our sponsors for today's episode, TherapyNotes. They're who I use in my practice. I couldn't do my practice without them. And go check them out today at TherapyNotes.com. And if you'll use the coupon code Gordon, just Gordon, you can get 2 months free of their services. That's a great deal. And also special thanks to Julie Harris and her team over at Green Oak Accounting. They are absolutely the specialists for counselors and therapists in private practice. That's that's their specialty. So go check them out as well at greenoakaccounting.com. Well, thanks again, folks, for joining me for today's episode. Do go and check out and sign up for the upcoming free webinar on preparing for tax season. Again, that's, as I mentioned at the beginning, Julie Harris at Green Oak Accounting is joining me for that one. And you can get to that at practiceoftherapy.com/tax webinar. And you can sign up for that webinar coming up on December the 11th. And I think it will be a pretty informative webinar for you. So go be sure to sign up for that. Also, if you haven't done so already, be sure to get the new private practice startup guide. It's out there and available, and you can just go to practiceoftherapy.com and you can find the links to get that new updated edition of the startup guide. And again, that's a free resource for you that's out there. And also check out our other resources on our cool resources page. You can go to practiceoftherapy.com, and whenever you open the page, you'll see some buttons and ways to get to our resources page. Got lots of resources there, and I would invite you to go over and take a look at those. So take care, folks. Got some great guests lined up for future episodes here. I've been getting them lined up this week, and I appreciate, as always, you being part of this journey with me. And do take time to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. Whether it be on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or any of the other podcatchers that are out there. Take time to subscribe and give us a review as well. That's always helpful to get your honest feedback on things. So take care, folks. Hope you have a great rest of your week or weekend whenever you might be listening to this. Take care. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.